Now that we have all of that out of the way, let's get ready to get right into the good stuff. So since we are recording today, we do ask that you keep yourself muted, although raise your hand if you would like to come off mute to speak. And certainly, please feel free to use the chat pod to ask questions, to share your thoughts. We'd love to know where you're all coming in from. So if you want to just pop into that chat pod, who you are and what state you're representing today, that would be fantastic. We're really excited to see some different states joining us today. I especially want to thank our speakers today. So we will have three members of the New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services team, Ted Deers, Steve Landry, and Aubrey Volker. And then we will also have Dean Outhouse joining us today. So thank you to all of them for their time and their expertise. Following the DES team's conversations, we are going to bring Dean up, and Dean is the Snow Division Manager at Piscataqua Landscaping, and he's going to share a little bit about his many years of experience working with the Green SnowPro program and being really present in the snow industry as well. So thank you all. Your willingness to share your experiences really means a lot to this conversation. We do appreciate it. I also want to thank everyone who's in attendance today. It's really quite exciting to see the strong interest and the collaboration coming from across state lines. So we in New Hampshire know the challenges with salt and winter operations and balancing those safer roads, but also protection for the environment. And we're hopeful to see other states being inspired by the program and maybe looking for how they can make it their own. So we are glad you're here today. Let me get ready to turn things over to Ted Deers. So Ted is going to kick us off and he will introduce his other team members as well. Ted's the Assistant Director of the Water Division at New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services. The division has about 270 employees, all dedicated to conserving environmental quality, protecting public health, and supporting communities to improve their water infrastructure. In his 28 years of state service, Ted has previously served as the administrator of the Watershed Management Bureau and manager of the New Hampshire Coastal Program. He received his BA in economics and political science from Ripon College, and Ted also earned a master's degree from Yale University School on the Environment. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you, Ted, and take it away. Thanks for being here.
Excellent. Thanks, Marilee. Appreciate you putting this on, and it's great to see some names I recognize from across the snow belt here in the United States. And so I'll let Aubrey get our presentation. All right. Thank you, Aubrey. Appreciate that. So I will be talking a little bit about just sort of kicking off how we got to the point we are. And then I'll turn it over to Aubrey. Aubrey is our salt reduction coordinator. She is the guru on all things Green SnowPro. And she's going to talk a little bit about the program itself. And then batting cleanup for us at DES will be Steve Landry. Steve is the supervisor of our watershed assistance section, which is really the section of DES is dedicated towards stormwater and non-point source controls. And it's a great group of folks who have been doing this for a very long time. And he's going to talk about kind of the recent lawsuits that we've been involved in and sort of how the whole program has stood up to some of those lawsuits. So with that, Aubrey, let's get it rolling. There we go. So I get the pleasure of kind of giving the history lesson, having been around now for several decades of doing this work. I've become evidently the grizzled veteran and the institutional memory, which is just bizarre to think about. But so I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of how we got going. So go ahead, Aubrey. So New Hampshire was the first state in the nation to use salt regularly for winter maintenance. Our Department of Transportation has some great pictures of a couple of guys in the back of a pickup truck going down the road, scooping out salt out of a barrel and spreading it with a shovel off the back of the pickup truck. So a little bit different experience today. And over the last 40 years, like the rest of the country, or at least the northern tier, our salt use has more than doubled in just in a few decades, which is resulting in water quality impacts. And we see this pretty much everywhere. We do have a whole bunch of impairments, that is, violations of our water quality standards for chlorides. And we've seen these really across the state, but pretty much anywhere where there's significant development, if we go look, we'll probably find an impairment. And the other really troublesome issue that we're starting to face is water supply contamination. And what we're going to talk a little bit more as we go along about this, but we had a community that lost a major well, and replacement of a well these days for a municipality is about $1 million proposition. So losing one to salt is a pretty significant effort and a challenge for that particular community. And so we're seeing these just across the state where we have groundwater quality monitoring. We're seeing, again, our chlorides are increasing dramatically. So we do definitely see a problem. Slide, please. Our story about the Green SnowPro program, though, starts in the early 2000s. At that time, the state was looking to expand Interstate 93, which is the main thoroughfare that goes from the Boston area up through our lakes and our ski areas. So as you might imagine, it's a pretty important economic factor, and it's an economic engine. The little map there in the lower corner is a map of the state liquor outlets. So the state owns the liquor outlets, and we get a great deal of state revenue from them. And you can see the proliferation of liquor outlets along Interstate 93, which is testament to the importance of that road to our economy. And so in the early 2000s, the idea was to take the 2 lanes each way, which were I-93 from Manchester, our largest city, down to the Massachusetts border, to increase that essentially by a factor of 2, so that it would go from 4 lanes to 8 lanes, which all of that means more pavement. It means bigger on and off ramps. It means addition of park and rides. Interestingly, they were changing all the drainage, which was an open drainage. That is, the water just sort of ran off the side of the highway and into the ground, into closed systems. So it was going through treatment swales and going through other things, which is great for things like phosphorus and turbidity and metals and PAHs and other things like that. Not so good for chlorides, which are conservative. And so they're going directly through the system as opposed to going through the groundwater and taking more time to get to surface waters. And of course, more plowing, more highway, more pavement equals more salt. And so at the same time, EPA began looking at water quality in this area. And what they found was that we had water quality impairments. Next slide, please. This led us down the road of creating a total maximum daily load for chlorides. Those of you who are unaware, a total maximum daily load, or a TMDL as we call it, is basically a pollution diet. It says how much you are over water quality standards and what do you need to do in order to get below it. So it's basically, what is that allocation? How much do you need to reduce in order to get to standards? So this particular little chart here shows kind of what the results of that TMDL were. The interesting factor in this is, remember, all of this is stimulated by the big state highway. This is our Department of Transportation expanding the highway. But state roads are actually only 9% of the load in that particular part of the state. Ergo, there's a problem. You can't get basically a 50% reduction out of 9% of the load. So that meant that we had to look at other factors. You'll see here that municipalities owned a certain bit of the problem, but the vast majority of it was private. It was on private roads and parking lots. And that meant that we really had to start focusing in on that. And you can see the reductions needed, which are pretty vast and pretty difficult to achieve in order to get to that point. And in the lower other corner, you see the left-hand corner, you see the areas of the state, and particularly that area that's the closest to Massachusetts, which is the most densely developed, in which this became very problematic. So what we heard from people as we started to do this was that they needed training. And so we began to do training. And essentially, we just stole Minnesota's program. So thank you, Minnesota Water Pollution Control Agency. Thank you, thank you, thank you. We just basically stole your stuff. And we started doing training, volunteer training. What we heard from those people over and over again was that they were scared to reduce their salt use, even though they saw the merits of it, using less salt, spending less money, less pre-salting, anti-icing, all this stuff that we now take for granted, I think, in a lot of ways. They were afraid to do that because they were worried about being sued for simply using less salt. Even if they met what they were supposed to meet on their contracts, they were worried about the liability. So we began working with our legislature. Next slide, please. And in 2013, we created, well, actually before that, a couple of years before that, we created some legislation. Started out as a mandatory program, scaled it back to a voluntary program, took a couple of sessions to get it through, and essentially created this piece of legislation, which created the program pretty much as it exists today. There's been a fair bit of tweaking over the years on this law, but it is essentially what we have. And it was based, the liability piece of this was based on ski areas. And what it does is it recognizes, as with ski areas, that strapping, slick boards to the bottom of your feet, going to the top of the mountain, and then careening pell-mell through the trees is an inherently dangerous activity, as is walking around and driving around in snow and ice. And so basically it has the same kind of provision that the ski areas get, which is as long as you're not negligent, that is, if you go to the ski area, you see the pads around the poles, you see other sort of safety factors, you see them closing slopes that are not safe, roped off. And so it's the same kind of thing. As long as you're providing that sort of standard of treatment, that is the industry standard or what your contract dictates for a particular, private contractor, as long as you're meeting those and you're doing that and you're not negligent, and then it means that if you meet all of the requirements of the program, that essentially gives you limited liability relief, which really means that you shouldn't be able to get sued for a slip and fall case as long as you weren't negligent and you were meeting all these requirements. That's the way it was supposed to work. That's the way it's written. So next slide, please. The other thing that's really, I think, important about this, and this is one of the things that I think we've found has been attractive for this program, is that it also applies to property managers as well as to the contractor themselves. That's really important because it makes that relationship between the contractor and the contractor, it brings that together in a way that allows both of them to be able to work together to reduce salt. That was the whole point of this thing, is to people to use the right amount of salt in the right places at the right time, which Aubrey's going to talk more about here in a moment. But this is essentially what you have to do. And Aubrey's going to talk a little bit about the practicalities of what people are doing to actually meet these requirements today. But it requires some record keeping, requires some training, and it requires some paperwork, and of course a fee, to be able to maintain your certification. And I think in particular what we've found, and I'm going to talk about this just for a second, is that this record keeping piece is absolutely essential to proving the fact that you weren't negligent. So this idea of excellent record keeping to prove that you did what you were supposed to do to the industry standard, to meet the letter of your contract, that piece is really the critical element of the liability relief. And you're going to hear more from Steve at the end about how that manifests itself in the real world in the courtroom. If we consider the courtroom the real world, Lord help us if we do, but that is essentially how it plays out. And so you'll see some more of that here in a few minutes. Next slide, please. So what do we see as the benefits of the program? There are a number of them. One is that you see vast growth in the number of people who are getting certified each year. And that's amazing. That's been really, really great. And Aubrey's going to talk some more about that. But over the course of the program, we've educated lots and lots and lots of contractors. Lots of contractors coming in and out of the business in any particular year. They all are being exposed to this, and they're seeing the latest in technologies and the latest training. And so we've incentivized people getting to training. We've reduced at least a couple of the hurdles to reducing salt. Are there still equipment needs? Are there still other things? Yes. Is there still a cultural push to make the sidewalk crunch under your feet every day? Yes. All of those still exist, but we have at least reduced a few of those hurdles. it does start to build in some accountability. You have to report your salt use. We have reports of that. We get to understand what you're doing. It means that you're keeping your documentation. It does these sorts of things which build in some more accountability towards actual salt reduction. But most importantly, it makes it normal. When we first started talking about this a long time ago, in really like 2007, 2008, it was weird. Talking about reduced salt use was weird. Today, it is normal. It's industry talk all the time. And so I think that this is really part of where we want to go and some of the success we've had here in our state with our Green SnowPro program is just this normalization of salt reduction as a thing. And with that, I will end. Next slide, please. And see if anybody has any questions about sort of the historical context of how we got where we are today.
I'll just stop sharing for now so it's easier to see questions from people if anyone has any quite yet. Otherwise, we can move right on.
I'm not seeing
Absolutely.
anything quite yet, but Ted, you'll be hanging out with us through the end, I believe. So stay tuned. We'll let you know if there are any.
Excellent. All right. And then I'll turn it over to Aubrey and she'll talk about the program as it exists today.
Awesome. There we go. So let's see. Oops. There we go. Hi, everyone. I'm Aubrey Velker. I am the New Hampshire DES Green SnowPro and Salt Reduction Program Coordinator. So I really work with kind of the day-to-day stuff of managing all the certification programs, talking with our contractors, municipalities. So I'm going to kind of go over, how the program is set up. To start, it's primarily going to be focused on our commercial Green SnowPro certification program. We did just recently get the administrative rules adopted for a municipal Green SnowPro program last summer, which I'll touch on a little bit later, but to kind of start, be mainly on the commercial program and kind of what we've seen and how we've grown throughout the years. So of course, the main question is, how does one even become Green SnowPro certified to begin with? So there's two main steps that a person has to do in order to receive the certification. The first one is complete coursework. They need to attend a full course and pass an exam. There are lots of different opportunities for this coursework. UNH has been phenomenal with having great in-person courses, particularly our Snow Fighter seminar. The people can come, learn, take their exam. We also have an online course with the Smart About Salt console. We also work with Snow and Ice Management Association, SIMA, to do some coursework as well. After they complete the coursework, they then need to send an application and their fee to us at the New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services. Just completing the coursework does not automatically make them certified. Our training partners like UNH are, they're just training providers. They're not a certifying agency for the certification, but we communicate with them to make sure we know who took the class, who passed. But you need to send your application to us at DES. It's coming right to me, and I review it, make sure you passed your coursework, took the exam, submitted everything that needed to, and then you get issued your certificate. And how, it's kind of set up with the fees is for most companies, especially those that are a little larger, typically you'll have one person who holds a master certificate. This tends to be maybe an owner or a supervisor, something, somebody who's really intricate in planning everything. And then all the other employees are considered subordinate certificate holders. Every employee who's, doing snow and ice management needs to complete the coursework and send in an application in order to be considered certified and be best covered for that limited liability component. We do have the option for an individual certificate, for those people who are just kind of doing it, on their own, not with a large company. So generally, most larger companies will have an annual certificate fee of $350 that comes to us at DES. Some companies may opt to have multiple master certificate holders as well, but, kind of depends how they want to set it up with themselves. The training and course fees that are for those courses that person needs to complete. They are separate from the annual application fee. All of those training course fees, they will vary depending on the type of training, and they all go to our training provider. NHDES doesn't receive those course training fees, which is why there's that separate annual application fee that comes to us, as this is a fee-funded program. So it helps us keep it up and running. So then, how do you maintain your certification? So our New Hampshire Green Snow Pro certification is an annual certification, which means each person needs to renew their certification each year. And this requires a few things. It requires that they send in a renewal application. They submit an annual salt use report, which really it's pretty simple. It just kind of says, what did you use, how much, where did you use it? Just so maybe at some point we can kind of look through those reports and kind of see, are people actually using less salt? Are these BMPs that they're hopefully implementing working? And then they do have to do continuing education. So there's that first full course passing the exam that they have to take to first get into the program. And then they have to complete additional coursework every 2 years. So they have to make sure every 2 years they're keeping up on the coursework that's required in order to renew their certification. But every single year requires them to submit an application and their annual salt use report. And the continuing education, this is one of the things I think we've really seen growing kind of the past couple of years, specifically with the help of UNH, as well as some of our commercial contractors who have been in the program for quite a while, such as Dean Outhouse, who will be speaking a little later. They have been amazing in putting some great trainings and courseworks together, and especially focus on, very specific aspects. Last summer, they held a liquid applicators field day, which really was just a time for, applicators, companies to come together and have a chance to actually learn about implementing liquids into their practices, because it can be very overwhelming. There's a lot of information, there's new equipment. So having these courses where they can learn how to, actually do it and be able to ask the questions from people and companies who have done it successfully is awesome. Every year, we also have our annual New Hampshire Salt Symposium, typically every September. And this is open to both commercial and municipal applicators. And this is, again, a chance for everyone to come together. They can network. There's lots of different educational sessions and a great way to really learn and figure out, how you can move forward with implementing best management practices. And through the years, we have seen a lot of growth. Ted had that first graph that he kind of showed, when the limited liability came into play, huge growth in numbers of new certificate holders. This just shows, that very first season with that limited liability, there was 35 Green Snow Pro certificates issued. That included 22 different companies. Versus this current winter season, we have, 700 plus Green Snow Pro certificates issued from 175 companies that are involved with this program. So it's great to see that growth. We're hoping to continue to see it grow, hope to see more people come in, more companies as well. And then, as I mentioned earlier, this past May of 2024, New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services, they adopted the administrative rules for our voluntary municipal Green Snow Pro program. So again, as Ted mentioned earlier, municipalities in very urban areas are the second largest contributor to salt application. So it's really great to be able to bring them into this program and be able to recognize them for their efforts. This is set up a little differently than our commercial program. First off, with the municipal Green Snow Pro program, we are certifying each municipality as a whole versus each individual person like we do with a commercial. So, it's going to be City of Portsmouth, City of Nashua, or whoever who's going to apply as a whole city, town, whole municipality to become Green Snow Pro certified. And there's a few different tiers of certification. We have a standard certification that's pretty basic, similar to the commercial where they have to complete coursework. But they also need to have a salt reduction plan. There's specific requirements for storing their anti-icing and de-icing materials, different documentation for calibration as well. But for those who want to go above and beyond, or probably already are implementing different best management practices, there is the option for the advanced and expert where they kind of get to pick and choose what best management practices they want to implement based on their needs. And every town is going to be very different about, which practice is going to work best for them. So we're excited to really see this grow. Kind of the next steps, is to find more ways to actually incentivize municipalities to become Green SnowPro certified. Right now, this is a great way for us to recognize those that are already doing a lot of the work to reduce their salt usage. But if we could have some kind of, financial incentives that we could provide some kind of, whether it be grant funding to be able to get better equipment, invest in brining equipment, or even just additional education is kind of different avenues we're looking at right now. Especially if we could have, I know state of Ohio has a really great grant program where they have funding for that sort of thing as well. So we're kind of looking at avenues for New Hampshire to be able to have something similar to that. Currently, we do not have any municipalities currently active in the certification. However, all of the kind of application materials we didn't have ready and posted until late fall last year of 2024. So a lot of municipalities need to get the different, have to go through budgeting, get all those approvals. But we do have, we've talked to a lot of them. We do expect quite a few of them to apply to be Green SnowPro certified for the 2025-2026 winter season. So we're excited to see the growth of that, be able to partner with them to kind of, really see more of the states, help with salt reduction. And then just another thing we've really started to focus on is just some general outreach. Those of you who are already in this industry, you understand, why salt reduction is important. You'd love to do it because it's a reduction in your costs as well. But of course, one of the pushbacks is always, just kind of from the general public or just from residents who don't fully understand how salt works and why it's important to reduce our salt usage. So we've done lots of things, just fun social media posts. We participated in the Winter Salt Week that was this past January. And that was a collaboration of organizations from all across the nation to kind of come together and really bring awareness to the issue, with webinars every day, lots of different outreach. So that's one of the things we've really been pushing is getting, just the community to understand why this is an issue and why they should care. Why, we don't want you to be crunching and walking, crunching on the salt as you walk, why that is bad. I know a number of our commercial applicators a lot of times still get phone calls, saying, hey, come back and put more salt down because we can't see it, even though it's completely ice-free. So really trying to change that cultural perspective of we don't need this much salt put down is one of our main goals. So with that, I will stop and see if anyone has any questions yet. But next up will be my colleague, Steve Landry, and he will go more into the limited liability component and really how that's kind of played out in the legal community.
Aubrey, I'm not seeing any immediate questions.
Perfect. And there'll be plenty of time later. So then I will
Absolutely.
hand it over to Steve.
Thanks, Aubrey.
There we go.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for the invitation to try present with Aubrey and Ted here this afternoon on the Green SnowPro program. And as Ted mentioned, I am the Watershed Assistance Section Supervisor in the Department of Environmental Services, which is the section that houses the Green SnowPro program. And I was I guess fortunate enough to be subpoenaed to partake in a limited liability case, and curiously, Ted somehow found himself out of state at the time. I still question that, but regardless, I was pegged to go and take part in this, which was actually an amazing educational experience in the end. And the important thing for us is that the outcome was positive and we were able to fully vet the limited liability protection afforded to our commercial Green SnowPro salt applicators as long as they're meeting all the requirements under the RSA that governs it. Next slide, Aubrey. And as I just said, until 2022, most slip and fall, actually all slip and fall claims that we were made aware of were quickly withdrawn or settled as bench trials without trials, for two main reasons. One, no one wants to get embroiled in lengthy, expensive trials. And the one that I'll talk about was a 6-day trial. It takes a lot of time, resources, and expenses on both parties. And then also the other reason, unfortunately, is that any lapses in our contractor commercial applicator training, their record keeping, and just maintaining their Green SnowPro certification makes them susceptible to not having the limited liability protection as a Green SnowPro operator. And we can sympathize with that. You got to keep detailed records under the rules established for this program and whatnot. And winters are very complicated and hectic, and there's so many variables. But these cases before the one that I'll speak about were basically settled or dismissed because at bench trials because the Green SnowPro applicators assumed that they were completely entitled to immunity based on the fact that the entities hiring them hired a Green SnowPro applicator, and that's not the case. And courts obviously disagree with that. And in most cases, it's just a failure to do good record keeping and adhere to the Green SnowPro training requirements. So until this particular case, that was kind of the track record, unfortunately. But there is a burden of responsibility on our Green SnowPro applicators to get certified in time, follow the rules, and maintain the records to ensure that this liability continues to be an asset and an incentive for commercial applicators to get Green SnowPro certified. Next slide, Aubrey. So this particular case happened at a pretty large apartment complex in southern New Hampshire. It was actually in the town of Derry, which was one of those watersheds that Ted highlighted on his map that has some fairly severe impairments of chlorides in surface waters. This was a situation where a young woman was severely injured after slipping and falling, and what she maintained was unmaintained snow and ice in a parking space at this apartment complex. And the plaintiff's claims were based on their assertion that there was gross negligence against not only the landlord, Chartwell Management, but also the commercial snow and ice managers from North Point Outdoors here in New Hampshire. And as I said, this was a 6-day trial. And before I go to the next slide, I would just say in our inner voice, we were hoping that if anybody was going to pursue a jury trial, they would select one of these particular contractors. There's several contractors that, have really excellent record keeping track records, and North Point was one of them. And we have another example of someone from one of these A+ outfits here with us today with Dean, who you'll hear from later on. But I just wanted to lay that foundation. So it's like, thank you. We're so glad it's someone like North Point getting sued for this. So next slide, Aubrey. And just a little background on North Point. They are a fairly large snow and ice management firm with 140 employees during the winter months. They have 80 trucks, heavy equipment, 40 sidewalk machines. They maintained a 10-year winter maintenance contract with Chartwell before leading up to this incident. And in those 10 years, they didn't have a single claim against them for negligence at this property. Next slide. And North Point really prides themselves on training. They have 3 tiers established for their training for all their employees that do winter snow and ice management. They do pre-season full-day sessions of training. They do their Green SnowPro trainings and exams. They are an approved trainer themselves, that Aubrey certifies them that they are eligible to train their own crew. So they train it in their situation center. They have, great AV equipment and whatnot. They gather everybody together pre-season and do all the training, administer the exams to make sure they maintain all the Green SnowPro required training. In season, they keep checking their application rates plowing techniques, map reviews, and they do regular updates for site-specific challenges they encounter. And then postseason, they revisit everything they did to make sure they, really met their contract obligations, performance, any successes, and learn from them, but also check out those areas that need improvement to improve their snow and ice management. Next slide, Aubrey. And then they do really pride themselves on a commitment to excellence at North Point. Hands-on technical training of fleet maintenance is outstanding. They have multiple on-road technicians for real-time support so they can meet their contractual obligations during snow events, before snow events, and ice events. And what I want to stress here is really their attention to detail and meticulous record keeping and retention, because that was really the key in this particular case going forward. And those records include our annual SALT accounting reports that we expect to see from every Green SnowPro commercial applicator when they reapply the following year. This is mandated in the rules, so you have to have that piece of information in order to get recertified. Next slide, Aubrey. And so in the case, when the case got underway, again, there was the plaintiff's counsel was really trying to find holes and loopholes in Green SnowPro rules, contractor management, and adherence to the contract and the scope of work that they agreed to with Chartwell Management. They were trying to imply that services were not rendered the way they were written in the contract, and North Point really is pretty detail oriented at like time of arrival on site when they do de-icing activities. It's all recorded. They have GPS, time in, time out, software tracking records. The plaintiff was also trying to get North Point to admit that they failed to use best practices for snow removal. But the North Point practices at Fairway are consistent. They attack the parking lots and sidewalks the same way for every event. They just alter and adapt as conditions demand of them. The other thing was that they had multiple parties serve as witnesses to say when they were on site, when they achieved clearing, when vehicles were moving and whatnot. The big one that the plaintiff was pushing when they had me take the stand, they had representatives from North Point take the stand, was that, please say whether or not North Point followed all the Green SnowPro guidance manual practices to deal with this snow event. And the bottom line is that the manual is a guidance document that presents various best management practices for battling snow and ice events. There's no way you would need to administer all the practices in there. You need to pick the ones that are appropriate for that moment in time, for that particular event, for that property. And that's a consistent message that North Point witnesses gave, along with myself and the Chartwell Management property manager, was that, we all gave the same answer and couldn't answer it as a yes or no question, which is what the plaintiff's counsel was seeking. And it kind of frustrated them, which was fairly satisfying. Next slide. The other avenues they took was that the plaintiff's counsel tried to get the defendants to admit that there was a failure to clear pathways between parked cars. Any of you in the snow and ice management industry know that it's impossible to do due to plow widths. You can't get in between multiple cars packed together, especially in this case. Some of those vehicles hadn't been moved for months, so they were just literally buried in place. The plaintiff's counsel also submitted photos that showed uncleared areas in the Fairways parking lots, but then the timestamps conflicted with what North Point plow operators and people that were driving salt trucks had taken and had logged in their records, because the photos that the plaintiff submitted were taken before the cleanups even occurred. So they were trying to sway the jury with photos that were false. And the big one was that the alleged slip and fall of this young lady occurred on a parking lot where snow had not been removed. But in reality, she slipped off one of those manicured grassy islands with a curb in between that and her car. And that witness's testimony was pretty powerful to hear. And just a quote here from Rob Fairborn at North Point, reflecting on the case, was that, questioning after 6 days, it was evident that North Point's focus on best practices and their highly trained team executed a storm response to perfection, eliminating any allegations against us. Couldn't agree more. Just every witness that was up there gave a similar story. No loopholes present, and obviously winter maintenance excellent by North Points, and record keeping was the key to this one. Aubrey, next slide, please. So in the end, after 6 days, it was unanimous jury verdict, unanimous that evidence was in the defendant's favor, and we had proven the statutory defense and returned the defense verdict. The plaintiff wasn't satisfied with that, so they filed a motion for judgment, notwithstanding the verdict by the trial, to have the judge revisit it and consider it, but the judge denied that because he felt that the evidence was sufficient and they could not prove that North Point did not uphold the Green SnowPro limited liability elements. There was a notice filed by Ms. Rogers and her counsel after that to seek a notice of mandatory appeal on that judge's decision, and that was going to go to New Hampshire Supreme Court. However, during the intervening time, her counsel found it to be unreasonably difficult to represent her any further, because I think they knew there was no foundation of evidence to stand upon by all the evidence provided during that 6-day trial. So they abandoned representing her, and then New Hampshire Supreme Court never heard from her in time to register her notice of mandatory appeal, and the appeal was dismissed and the case was closed, and obviously a pretty resounding victory for the Green SnowPro limited liability that we are happy to share with you today, and happy to share with others in the legal community as an educational piece. But it's also a reminder that our Green SnowPro commercial applicators have to have meticulous record keeping to make sure this this kind of decision can be made in the future if it ever goes this far. Next slide, Aubrey. And in summary of this, based on the strength of that court victory, which we were provide a lot of assistance from our Office of Attorney General here in New Hampshire, and we had obviously fantastic legal counsel for North Point. And in the aftermath of that, we made a presentation to New Hampshire Bar Association. Ted, Aubrey, and I made that presentation to educate them on New Hampshire Green SnowPro, and also to educate the New Hampshire judicial branch about what is Green SnowPro, what is the limited liability afforded to those snow and ice managers, and what was the outcome of that particular case, so that the legal community in New Hampshire understands it and understands the boundaries of it and the rules that it is governed by. So we continue to do outreach as needed, and go forward from there. Next slide, Aubrey. And in general, you heard from Ted, the grizzled veteran of Green SnowPro, Aubrey, our youthful and continually optimistic manager of Green SnowPro, and myself on kind of 3 components of the program and where are we going from here. One big nugget of information is that we're currently working on that BMP manual that I referenced. That was an important piece of the court case. This best management practices manual also involves our Green SnowPro training curriculum and the exams that our commercial applicators take. We're working with a task force that's made up of people from our agency, and more importantly, from commercial applicators in New Hampshire who are generous with their time to work on this task force, and a consultant that we have to update the manual and the exams and curricula. We're continuing our outreach to the insurance community. This is a big important piece to Green SnowPro in New Hampshire, as some insurance companies are only going to underwrite their commercial applicators that are Green SnowPro certified. So that's a interesting development in the program. Aubrey is working hard all the time to develop education outreach materials on contract language, communication with clients that hire our Green SnowPro contractors, and how to navigate any slip and fall claims that should arise. We say we're improving our SALT accounting system, but Aubrey and I talked this morning. It's like we really need to develop a better SALT accounting system. We have annual SALT reports filed by commercial, and soon we'll have municipal annual SALT use reports. So we really need to have a kind of better infrastructure to manage that SALT accounting system, to answer questions about how much salt is being putting down, by what sectors, in what regions of the state, and by what salt applicator sector. We're working on accountability procedures for our Green SnowPro certificate holders, and I think this is going to become very important in the near future as our municipalities become certified, because if they've claimed that they are going to be an expert municipality Green SnowPro holder, we just want to see what they're doing for those extra practices for snow and ice management, salt storage, and all the other things that make them go above and beyond to hold that expert certificate. So we want to have some accountability for both them and for our program. And you'll hear this probably from us whenever you talk to us. We really need to find some dedicated funding to support a full-time Green SnowPro coordinator. Aubrey is doing kind of full-time efforts on a part-time basis for us because that's what the program can afford right now. It's a fee-funded program. And then we can find dedicated funding in New Hampshire to support a loan and grant program for education outreach, equipment across commercial and municipal and state sectors. This would allow our agency to award grants or loans to those entities that require upgraded equipment to switch from handling solid rock salt to switching to brine. It seems like it's always a cost issue when we get rebuffed on suggesting that. So this would offer us an opportunity to provide financial support to buy equipment, or at least find a way to partially co-fund equipment transition and fleet transition from solid salt to brine. So that's our dream right there. Funding. And I'll stop there, and thanks for the opportunity.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Ted, Stephen, Aubrey. I'm not seeing any immediate questions in the chat pod, but hang tight because there was a lot of great information shared and we might see some questions arising. At this point, though, and Aubrey, feel free to pop those email addresses right into the chat pod if you want as well. And Dean, we're going to welcome you to the virtual stage, and Dean's going to take us home sharing a bit of his experience in the industry and in the Green SnowPro program. Thanks, Dean. Oh, Dean, we've got you muted still.
I do that all the time. Thank you, and thank you for having me today. So we just went over 45, 50 minutes of slides. I'm going to try to pull it in, and hopefully there's questions and comments that I can answer. Just to give you a very quick background, been with the Snow and Ice Management Association since 2005, became a certified snow professional in 2007. Went through the program for the New Hampshire DES Green SnowPro program in 2014. CIMA Advanced Snow Manager in 2022. And I've been in the industry for about 3 decades. So I am one of those old timers that, yes. The biggest thing today, if you get anything out of what was talked about, is documentation. Documentation is so critical. That's what saved Rob Fairburn of North Point Outdoors in his lawsuit. And that's what's ultimately going to save or reduce the monetary value that is paid out in your lawsuit if you come about one. So other than New Hampshire, I just learned recently Vermont and New York have similar liability coverage for winter subcontractors, similar to the state of New Hampshire. Minnesota has been trying for several years. In Wisconsin, we're battling with Wisconsin to adopt one as well. Also, to give you a little background, I am recently elected to the board of directors for the Snow Ice Management Association, and this was one of the reasons is because I'm trying to get what we have here in New Hampshire across the 50 states as well as Canada, the liability protection for contractors. It comes down to best practices. We have to document everything from our pre-season to our training to the weather reports. If you don't utilize an independent weather resource, I highly suggest you do 1, if not 2, if not 3. And these documents, correct me if I'm wrong from the DES, but these cases can come up to 3 years after the incident. A couple of years back, I had a slip and fall that was 2 days before the 3 years had expired. And it was in a similar instance that Rob had. It was between 2 cars. I provided all the documentation, all the best practices, never went to court, but, and this is the biggest headache and frustration from everyone in the snow industry, my insurance company still paid out. And this is something that we've been struggling with for years, and something that we are trying to overcome is that even though you do everything correctly, the documentation, the training, the time on site, the pre-treatments, the clearing, the post-treatments, the monitoring, you may still be pulled into a lawsuit. This Green Snow Pro program by no means is the get out of jail free card. You have to put the work into it. So again, stress and documentation, 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 always. The more the better. I treat it as with how long you carry or hold your receipts for tax purposes. The longer you hold on to them, the better off you're going to be. But documentation is everything. For me, the Green Snow program has been a great way to meet and network with several different people. Rob and I have become acquaintances, friends over the past couple of years. He and I right now are working with the New Hampshire Task Force to update the Green Snow program and the training documents that are being provided to be more in line with today's standards. Unfortunately, the expectations of our clients increase every year. I resemble it to us going sledding. You know, going downhill is great, but us old farts that have to go back up the hill with a sled is trouble. And what happens is once we have that fun ride down that the storm, we got our clients that hop in our sled, and the clients are driven by the contract. How and what is in your contract is so very important. Clauses, certain clauses. Never sign a contract that says zero tolerance. There's no such thing. And how contracts are written, the way the words are arranged is extremely important. You really have to take the time to read these contracts. And there's nothing that says you can't cross out a line item in a contract and initial it. But that is so very important. The next person to hop in your sled is the employees of the place that you signed the contract with. A lot of times you will sign the contract with a property management company, and the company they hired isn't aware of the clauses in the contract. So they're hopping in the sled, expecting you to do more and go above what's in the contract. Then the next person to hop in the sled is the employees of the company or the site that you're servicing. The sled is getting heavier and heavier and getting harder to pull up that hill. Next person is the people visiting the site. And ultimately, the next person, who is the biggest person of all, is the attorney, who's going to fight, and is probably the weight and more of all the other 4 or 5 people that hopped in that sled to go up the hill. So it's an upward hill battle, and it's frustrating by all ends, but you have to document everything. And if anything comes out of this, just document anything and everything you do related to the snow removal. And where you're going to save it, I have no idea, or what programs you use. First step is all your vehicles, all your loaders should be GPSed. That's the best way of documentation. There's multiple GPS companies out there to assist. And then what sort of data program are you saving that GPS documentation on? How are you doing your invoicing? When you do your invoicing, are you listing the date and time that you salted, or are you just listing it like we do, the date we salted it, and if something comes up, we go back and give that exact date and time. That's the biggest thing, is just documentation. I'm hoping people have questions. I mean, I could go on. This is what I do 12 months out of the year, and I'm all over the place, and that's how I am. But I'll ask Marley to put my email out there. More than happy to answer emails or walk people through it.
So, Dean, thank you. We do have some questions. So first one, you mentioned that you'd heard about liability coverage in New York and Vermont, and some of our New York friends have chimed in that they're unaware of that. And I know Vermont, there's some discussions. Can you fill in any missing gaps there on where you've heard this and what the status is? And then Chris Nowitzki, I believe Chris is with the Lake George Association in New York. We're going to give him a chance to ask a question.
I've been trying to get a hold of someone from the Lake George because they have a great salt symposium. That was enough. See, I'm already all over the place. The Lake George Salt Symposium, I believe it's in October, because the New Hampshire Salt Symposium is in September. And I believe they follow us after a week or two. So hopefully I can get involved with Chris or contact with him later or after this.
Sure.
That would be great. So before this, I reached out to Martin who kind of heads up the Snow and Ice Management Association Board of Directors. Because Martin, for the past couple of years, has been fighting with the lobbyists for the Wisconsin liability protection for the subcontractor. I asked him, how's it going, where it stands, and he texted me back that Vermont has an active bill. I can't get anyone in legislation to get back to me, but as far as I'm aware, it's gone into effect. And he said something about New York has a similar bill as well, but he doesn't know much about it because it was just voted in. So I haven't done my research on it yet. I'm just passing it on that I just got word that these have recently been signed. How recently, I don't know, but I haven't had the time to look into them. But Vermont and New York, other than New Hampshire, are the only ones currently that have bills signed that I'm aware of.
Hey,
So it's something I just learned
Ted
this
might
morning
have
today.
excellent, and I see Ted hopping in, so Ted might have some thoughts.
Yeah, Vermont is working on it. We've testified to the Senate there this session, and so and we're actually we may be back there this next week, helping Vermont to talk about the program and what they'd like to do. So I think that what you're suggesting, Dean, is what you've heard is that both states have made some progress in various legislative committees, but nobody's gotten one over the finish line yet.
Okay.
Wisconsin was close. Vermont appears to be close. Chris Nowitzki can talk about the efforts in New York State, which probably has more lawyers per capita than any other place in the world. But they have, everybody's trying to do some of this work. And it is challenging there. I saw some people raise some questions about what does it take to get over the finish line? And the answer is champions.
Yeah.
Champions like Dean in the industry, champions like Chris in the nonprofit world, and champions in the legislature. That's what helped us get over the finish line. Was one of our state senators happened to own a plow company, a winter maintenance company. So that was very, very helpful for us. He understood clearly the issues at hand. So I think those are really the key pieces are the champions, the industry, and somehow being able to get through the trial lawyers.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Ted, for expanding on that. Chris, I want to give Chris Nowitzki a chance to hop in. Hi, Chris.
Good afternoon, and thank you for putting this together. And it's great to see you, Ted. And thank you for that, being the leaders and setting the standard with the Green SnowPro program and how, forgive the pun, but it's intended, you broke the ice and put up with it and it held up. So congrats on that. And again, all the great work. And Dean, I did get a message from you. I tried to get back to you, but couldn't leave a message but we'll touch base shortly thereafter. My question would be, so the paperwork and the recertification every year by the Green SnowPro contractors, and have you ever seen, and with the records that are submitted, have you actually seen salt not being reduced, and has that ever been looked at by your department? Have you looked at it that much, and has anybody actually not become recertified because of not being able to document their practices? So
I can start with that, and Ted, you can also chime in. So that's a great question. We always get that question of, is salt reduction actually happening? We have tried to look at some of the data we pull in, mainly from those annual salt use reports. It is very difficult to get that data, mainly because each winter is so different.
Yep.
And the amount of salt to be applied, as all of you know, really depends on countless factors.
Yep.
And we did try taking some data, and from applicators that had been in the program for so long. We had like 5+ years of salt use data from them. We tried to compare it to like a weather severity index. We didn't really, see anything in, reduction. But with something like the winter severity index, it's really only looking at how severe winters are, how much snow you're actually getting, but doesn't take into account a lot of different things, such as, a lot of the thaw days where there's salting, even though there wasn't actually any winter weather, things like that. So that's one of the things we'd love to be able to see. We're kind of hoping at some point. I think Ted briefly mentioned one of our towns had one of their public well supplies recently go out because of how high the chlorides are. So they did receive a drinking water grant, and they're actually working with the town, with commercial contractors, with DOT to implement best management practices, as well as then they're also doing a lot of water quality monitoring as well. So hopefully something like that we'll see, a couple years down the road that, hey, they implemented these practices and we actually saw, some of this water quality improve a couple years down the road. And again, so chloride or winter salt, it's not actually regulated in the States. We can't actually tell people how much salt they can or can't use. So nobody's ever kicked out of, or isn't recertified for Green Snow Pro because they use too much salt. The only time they wouldn't get their certification renewed is if they didn't submit all the documentation required for renewals.
Yeah, I
And
think-
pay their fee, right?
And
And the
You
fees.
got
And if I may just piggyback on what Aubrey said, so a really good example is what happened in the month of February for us. So through the software that we use, I know how many square feet of asphalt I care for within our contracts. In the month of February, we had the most amount of snow. We had a storm generally every 3 to 4 days. But what was unique about February 2025 is that I had a week of single digit temperatures. And that drastically boosted up the amount we were salting or putting down because I have to ensure safe passage at these sites. So we were going out in the morning, we were going out in the afternoon, we were going out at night, again the following morning, again the following afternoon, because I had to have that documentation of best practices to ensure safe passage and visits. But it wasn't melting because I had 7 and 8 degrees. And we all know the colder it gets, the more salt you use, and salt's not effective below a certain temperature. Several different things to take into account. So in Aubrey's defense, you can't just take the amount of square feet you maintain, put it in the equation, and this is how much salt you're supposed to put out for the year. What we're seeing is as we're increasing our liquid brine program, our salt usage is going down, even though the amount of square footage we're maintaining is drastically increasing because we're taking on more accounts because we're now in Portland, Maine, Thompson, Maine. We're all the way down in Mass. We have 7 different locations now. But because of our salt brine program, our salt consumption and usage is being decreased, even though our square footage is increasing.
Excellent. Chris, anything else? Oh, sorry.
Well, I was just going to give a plug because our Salt Summit, the Lake George Salt Summit, will actually be on September 24th this year. So thanks for that recognition. And again,
Excellent.
thanks for all the work that you guys have done.
Thanks for joining us, Chris, and thanks for sharing that. If you've got a link to that one, feel free to pop it into the chat pod. Any other questions? I did put in the chat pod, Connecticut has a program that is similar in terms of best practices, management, and training, but certainly, as far as I know, they do not have liability protection built into their legislation or their RSA. But they did go through that process a couple of years ago within their legislation to implement that.
Arlie, I just texted you the bill status of S-29 for the legislation government. Martin just sent me that. I haven't had a chance to click on it, but he did send me the link. So that is the status of the Vermont thing.
We'll include that.
Yep. And the New Hampshire Salt Symposium is September 10th.
September is a great month and getting ready for good salt use. Awesome. Any other questions? Oh, and so Nick had shared tips to get a program similar in other states. And I know, Ted, you talked about the importance of having legislative partners, of having industry partners. What are some of the hurdles maybe that you went through or that you experienced that maybe we can speak to you being able to overcome to get our program in place?
Sure. So I think that there's a couple of different things that people have to sort of understand the politics. And so there's really 2 different sort of sets of politics that are going on. One is, I think, depends on sort of which side of the aisle you'd like to look at. But, one is certainly this people don't really want an expansion of government. They don't want an expansion of government into their business affairs. And so there is this sort of, and I think that what people are seeing is that if there is sort of this liability relief, that it does encourage property owners to require their contractors to be Green SnowPro certified. Insurance companies pick up on it. They may be requiring their clients. So while it is voluntary, there's this idea that somehow you're sort of getting into people's trucks. So I think that there is some of that out there, just the sort of growth of government. We will say, anybody who asks us, and we've told a number of different states, that it does take administrative effort to be able to run a project like this, a program like this. It takes time. It takes talented people like Aubrey and Steve to be able to keep the program going and to be able to respond. We have to respond when someone gets sued. If Dean gets sued, we have to go into our records and then show that he was certified at the time of the incident, and making sure he had his training. And we have to keep track of all of that because it's part of the law. It's part of how the legal structure works if you were ever sued. So there's some administrative issues. And then the flip side of it is that there's a lot of people who are victims' rights kinds of policies, people that don't like tort reform, people in the Trial Lawyers Association, which tend to be very powerful in a lot of different states. Those folks see this as taking away something from victims, potentially taking something away from victims. What this requires is a lot of education to all of those people. And I think the case that what people lose in this is that this isn't about giving something to people that they don't already have. Without the liability relief, if you get sued, it's still you still have to prove that reasonableness. You still have to prove that you had good documentation. What this system does is it makes sure that just because you've used less salt, just because you've followed best management practices, you can't be sued simply because you use less salt. And that's what that's what gets kind of lost in this conversation, is that the limited liability isn't something you're giving to someone. It's making sure that they're endowed with that so that they can actually do practices differently. And, the Dean talked a lot about the contracts. What does it say in your contract? If it says black pavement every single day, all hours of the day, every time there's a storm, you can't reach that. And if you do have that, it means that you're going to be nuking those parking lots. And so there's that tie-in back with that. So I think that people need to kind of understand that the political framework, as well as kind of how to explain this to people. So there's, I think, a lot of education. When we've worked closely with other states who are going down that road, it's really explaining these subtleties. And we had a very nice conversation with the Senate committee in Vermont, again, sort of trying to help them understand how to talk about this and how to think about this. And then it really truly is this champions. Nothing happens in the legislatures without champions. And so it's how do you build those partnerships? The good folks in Minnesota, they had I have mine sitting right here. They did these teaspoons.
Yep.
They did these little teaspoons that they took around to the Dean. You're getting very tired, but they brought these little teaspoons around to stop over salting, and then use that as a tool to go and talk with all the legislators as a grassroots effort. They got him a lot of attention. Did he get to the finish line? No, but it did get a lot of attention, and I continue to have my stop over salting spoon right here in front of me all the time. So there are lots of ways to try to achieve that.
And if I can just add one quick thing to that, I think another sweet spot for the New Hampshire Green SnowPro program, Ted just ticked off a bunch on that list, but it was also that convenience that we had a champion who was a snow and ice manager on a very powerful committee, in the legislature, and that worked in our favor. But the other thing is having UNH Technology Transfer Center as a partner from day one, because we were not ready to do trainings, tracking. They set up a database for people that could register and track salt. So without UNHT2, this program doesn't get off the ground. So we feel kind of spoiled because we have UNHT2. We also in New Hampshire have the UNH Stormwater Center. It's like two areas of complete expertise that we're really dependent on to do the collective work we do, because we don't have the capacity for staff hours to do that, nor some of the expertise. So kudos to UNHT2 and Marilee and your teams to still be here for us, because it doesn't work without that partnership.
Well, and our partnerships with SIMA, Dean
Yeah.
talked about that. That's
Yeah.
really important to us. That really has been a key piece of kind of how not only have we've been able to do our SALT symposia, but it's a key piece to how we're going to move forward in the next phases of our program, as Aubrey talked about. And then our partners with the Smart About SALT Council out in Ontario, who truly saved our bacon during COVID when we couldn't do trainings, and they had just created an online training program that that they run for us. So you know, it gave us an opportunity for people to be able to continue to get training during those times, and so that was a really key partnership that was super helpful.
Ted, I'll
Marley, if
kind
I
of
may,
add on. Oh,
if
go
I
ahead.
may just add to what Ted and Steve said. If there is any state out there that is asking for assistance, this is why I became a board member of SIMA, is because this is one near and dear to my heart. This is what I want to do. I am pushing the board to put financial assets, connections, the networking that we have available to assist these contractors in these states to implement a similar program, and to basically start walking them through it, what we failed on, what we did good on, and almost like a benchmark and step process. But anyone who's interested in any state, email me and I'll bring it back to the board, and we can start the process, or start the party, or start the committee to begin the process to help you achieve what we have here in New Hampshire.
Thank you, Dean. That's fantastic. And that might be a great way to wrap up if we don't have other questions. I just put in the chat pod to speaking to Dean and Ted and Steve's points. Lots of great resources out there. There are a lot of industry partners, a lot of information and training. So that piece of it is probably the fun, easy side of things. It's getting your champions, getting those conversations going. We're excited at T2. We have an intern this year who's helping us start to look at the public outreach and education component. How do we help the public understand what they're seeing happening in their parking lots and on their roads, so that they can be more knowledgeable in what they see as a shift. So lots of great stuff happening out there. If there aren't any other questions, I am going to make sure that we get this recording shared out with everyone, some of the resources that we've spoken to, some of the contact information. I want to thank Dean and Aubrey and Ted and Steve for joining us, for sharing, everyone who's been here today, and this recording will be available. So if you are starting to have this dialogue in your state, we hope that you will go back to this, share it with others, and reach out to this great group. Anything before we wrap you all up? Thank you all so much. Everyone stay safe and enjoy spring as it starts to arrive. We'll think about winter soon enough, I'm sure. Take care, everyone.